Good evening and welcome to the Byrd Theatre. My name is Robin Ashworth and I currently serve as Vice Chair on the board of the Byrd Theatre Foundation. The Byrd Theatre, as you probably know, is a 501c3 organization. That means that we are a nonprofit and we rely entirely upon donations, sponsorships, as well as the sale of movie tickets and concessions to forward the mission of this organization, which is, first and foremost, to preserve this beautiful, nearly 100-year-old art house movie theater. Additionally, we're committed to film education and generally just a love of the cinematic arts. So we thank you for being here and thank you for any contribution that you feel so moved to make. Every penny counts. I cannot emphasize that enough, so thank you. Again, on behalf of the theater, staff, and the board. This is a special night as we present Science on Screen, a film series offered by the Byrd Theatre through a grant initiative sponsored by, whoops. Oh, I know my clicker's not working. Give me a second. Technology, y'all. Science on Screen. There we go. Thank you for your patience during that technical difficulty. This is a film series offered by the Byrd Theatre through a grant initiative sponsored by the Coolidge Corner Theatre Foundation and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation in their effort to support science education at US-based nonprofit art house theaters. Just as an aside, notice that the Coolidge Corner Theatre is 5 years younger than the Byrd Theatre. Events are taking place across the country tonight, so we are actively participating in a national movement. Science on Screen is a creative pairing of current, classic, cult, and documentary films with lively introductions by notable figures, that's dubious in this case, but from the world of science, technology, and medicine. The Byrd will offer 3 films as part of this series, each of which are connected in some way to science, technology, our environment, and mathematics. And yes, I'm taking a liberty because STEM is usually engineering for the E, but we have an environmental film instead. Tonight's film is firmly rooted in science fiction and space travel set in the 23rd century. In April, we will offer a satirical, apocalyptic comedy about a rogue comet on a collision course with Earth. And in May, you will enjoy a biographical drama about the brilliant women of color who worked for NASA during the Cold War space race. Tonight, I revisit my academic identity as a professor of film and visual analysis and technological storytelling. And you, for the next 15 or so minutes, are in my class. Thanks for that. If you are thinking that science and movies seem like an odd or even forced pairing, consider this. Film, in and of itself, is a scientific technology. Indeed, in the early days of cinematography, film was a physical medium comprised of a flexible cellulose derivative or thermoplastic resin, coated with a photosensitive emulsion. It was a particular technology intended for a singular purpose, and it required special equipment developed just for its use. Once exposed, film had to be immersed in a chemical bath that converted silver halide crystals to silver metal to enable development of a negative image. Once fixed and dried, That development process rendered the film as a strip of transparencies through which projected light would be shown as the strip rolled by to produce a series of photographs on screen, moving at 24 frames per second, a speed just fast enough to make it impossible for the human eye to discern individual images. In the roughly 125 years since cinematography began, the technology of filmmaking has evolved to become a fully digital medium. Parallel development of extraordinary technologies like CGI, green screen, LED lighting, and a maturation of sound capture, creation, and editing have enabled filmmakers to offer visual experiences that so closely mimic what seems real. The viewer is easily transported into the story world of the film. And that is a college word, friends. Diegesis is a word for your story or narrative world. Our ability to conceive of and present visual stories, those adapted from literature, pure imagination, or conceptual ideas about what our world and our lives could be, has developed in sophistication, complexity, and verisimilitude. Thus, we as viewers willingly accept what we see as authentic, plausible, possible, even as we simultaneously understand that we are intentionally suspending disbelief. It is in that intersection of what is plausible, what is possible, and what actually exists that I invite you to pause. Consider the profound inspiration the stories we show and tell have to encourage development of real-world technologies. Imagination becomes a depiction. That depiction may turn into experimentation, then development, a prototype, and finally, production of something real. I would suggest to you that science is in the business of making science fiction real. From the story world of our film tonight, and the series from which it is directly sprung, I offer the following examples of real science Star Trek predicted or inspired. And I will qualify this. We are watching a film released in 2009. That film is absolutely based on the series. It functions essentially as a prequel or an origin story in that the original characters from the series are represented in the film. First of all, allow me to offer the Star Trek Communicator. It functions like a little box that opens, you speak into it, you close it when you're finished. It is very much like the flip phone. And that's a picture of Martin Cooper up there in the corner. He worked for Motorola and is credited with the successful invention of the first cell phone, which was not a flip phone, but as technology became more sophisticated, he used his documented inspiration from Star Trek and Dick Tracy to develop a flip phone prototype that became widely, if not universally, used. The Personal Access Display Device, or PAD. This was a prop frequently used in the original Star Trek series and repeated in our film tonight. As at the time of the series, the PADD, or PAD, was a plausible but as yet non-existent tool the crew used as a way to access information in a portable device. The iPad, the tablet, and certainly the smartphone, an evolution of the cell phone, are our real-world iterations of that device, now ubiquitous in our daily lives, as are large-scale computers with touchscreens capable of simulations, calculations, and 360-degree renderings of objects, landscapes, even human organs. Add to this the earbud, First clearly used by Uhuru in the original series and repeated in our film, the earpiece was used to receive communication signals and frequencies of various kinds. Here's a DIY representation of that earpiece. Today, Bluetooth technology is commonplace, and the Bluetooth earbud is evident across a wide spectrum of uses. And thank you, Russell Wilson. Consider FaceTime and video conferencing. This is a pedestrian communications technology we enjoy today. This concept is regularly represented in the Star Trek diegesis as Captain Kirk communicates with other ships, space stations, and people on planets. This form of communication requires a large view screen or flat screen television monitor, so prevalent in the Star Trek world and a central feature of the bridge of the Enterprise. And I am betting that just about everyone in this audience has access to a flat screen television. Other examples I can offer, I won't go into great detail here, but the hypo spray, a medical or medicine delivery system used frequently in the Star Trek world. It's not supposed to be painful. But beneath that, here on the screen, you see the real-world example of a jet injector. So we are quickly approximating that diegetic representation of medical delivery system. Here you have the 2009 Star Trek version of the phaser. The phaser. This is a weapon that the fleet of the Enterprise and the larger Federation would use. Unique in that it could be set to stun the person you were shooting at, or set to kill. Here we have our real-world version of that, the taser, a device that is used in place of an actual gun that shoots a bullet. Instead, it delivers a shock or a charge to render the victim immobile. Here, an example of a tricorder used for medical purposes. That's up here at the top. That's a later iteration of Star Trek. Here, Mr. Spock's version of the tricorder, which was actually used to read the atmosphere of a place where they were landing to determine whether it was safe for their presence. And here, a real-world example of a tricorder that is used by hazmat teams to determine whether there is a toxic level of some substance in an area, usually used by a hazmat team. And just for kicks, here's a representation of a medical bay or a sick bay on one of the fleet starships. Worth noting, diagnostic screens, a number of implements and supplies nearby, just a model for what medical care might look like. Here's one I bet you didn't know. Automatic doors. Taken for granted at hotels, malls, corporate buildings, and public venues of all kinds, first introduced on Star Trek, and which surely seemed a futuristic, glamorous, and incredibly convenient technology, which it is. As recently as 2014, engineers have come up with sensors and a new algorithm that understands the pace and approach of a person about to go through that door and adjusts accordingly. In other words, if you were strolling up to the door, it takes its time to open. But if you are booking it to get through that door, it opens quickly. Further, the algorithm adjusts for persons merely walking by the door, making its function more efficient and accurately predictive. Other versions of Star Trek offered us the computer replicator. This was a device that could create almost anything its user could name, from a bouquet of flowers, a rare culinary treat, or an Earl Grey tea served in a refined porcelain cup and saucer. 3D printers of our era are not quite capable of Star Trek's level of replication, but they have developed enough to be desktop machines that consumers can purchase and use at home. 3D technology is being explored to replicate machine parts, fabricate tools, render dimensional models, and create art. Another invention, one of my favorites, that a later iteration of Star Trek offers is the holodeck. First introduced in an animated version of Star Trek in the mid-1970s, the holodeck became a regular feature of Star Trek in the late 20th century. The holodeck could be programmed by the user to create a simulated 4D environment into which that person could walk, interact, and experience an alternate reality. Virtual reality is our answer to Star Trek's holodeck. And while VR technology is currently limited to a device the user wears, like heavy goggles, the experience can transport the user visually and actually affect the wearer's real-world responses. I predict a time when the holodeck model becomes a routine way in which we experience visual storytelling. We may yet be able to physically enter the story world and interact with its characters. And common throughout was the ability of Star Trek crew to activate and interact with a wildly intelligent computer along the lines of artificial intelligence with voice command. There are certainly more examples I could offer, more examples you have already thought of, that further illustrate how thoroughly we are informed by and accustomed to accepting technological development. Not yet, but probably within the next couple of 100 years, we may develop warp speed. In 1994, Mexican theoretical physicist Miguel Alcubierre suggested in his doctoral thesis that, and I quote, "It would only be a small step to a warp drive. If space-time were contracted in front of a spaceship and expanded behind it to compensate, it would be possible to travel to one's destination at a speed faster than light. The ship would remain encapsulated in a bubble, and the crew would not sense the magnitude of the interstellar journey," close quote. In a 2017 lecture, he compared this to being on a passenger conveyor at the airport. In July of 2021, scientists at DARPA and NASA successfully created a nanoscale structure, think microscopic model, of the bubble required to create a warp drive engine. While the math still has its gaps and the energetic concept remains largely theoretical, the experiment is a step toward realizing the prediction. I'm certain all of that sounds rather far-fetched, but the science exists, thanks to Albert Einstein and his work with quantum theory and relativity. I will not attempt to explain that. Another unrealized technology is teleportation. Don't we wish this was a form of travel we could actually use? Right now, the only teleporting science that has occurred successfully involves beams of laser light being deconstructed and reconstructed about 1 meter in distance in a lab, and you have to wear goggles, but it's a start. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the obvious overarching theme of Star Trek, which is firmly embedded in the mission of the Starship Enterprise. I'll let you read that. Extended space travel and the development of starships that can sustain routine travel into and out of Earth's atmosphere, to other planets, into other galaxies, and perhaps as far as human imagination can take us. It's possible. It's already happening. I'm sure you're aware of it. There are 3 billionaires on this planet who are racing to make commercial space travel possible. As Captain Picard would say, things are only impossible until they are not. As you enjoy tonight's film, and indeed it is meant to be enjoyed, keep in mind, and perhaps remark to yourself, Examples you see of technologies that look at once familiar and yet perhaps far off. This film was released in 2009, and here we are 13 years later. What seems dated? What remains worth technological consideration? What has already become real? Allow yourself to be transported into the story world, and allow yourself to consider what you see is actually possible. Thank you.